But now let's get into it a little bit more. The quarterback situation at USC with Jayden Maiava and Husan Lonsgstreet. And, for those who missed our Sunday show, like there is going to be a little bit of a kind of a rehash on this, just so like we continue the conversation at USC. No one thinks that Husan Lonsgstreet should outright replace Jayden Maiava, but the real question is, shouldn't Husan Lonsgstreet get some more reps? It's not that dissimilar from the Miller Moss dynamic last season. Obviously, Crash, you're going to be able to talk about that in greater detail as we go along. They're not the same kinds of quarterbacks. Like, it's not the same dynamic that you had last year with Miller Moss and Jayden Maiava, but the parallel is obvious. You have this hungry young guy, and you want to give him reps. You want him to feel useful and needed within the program, and you want him to be developed so that next year he's ready to rock and roll. He's ready to take what Maiava's done this year and lift it to a higher standard. So, Crash, all those things, we're going to talk about them more, but let's just start this conversation and your general impressions of what you're looking for, what you're interested in, and what you might want to see from the quarterback spot this Friday against Northwestern.
Well, Matt, I think it's a really interesting question. And for those of you who didn't get a chance to see us on Sunday, I highly encourage you should go back and watch that episode after this one. It was we had a really great discussion with Ethan about it. So I thought it was definitely, I think, a great place to start, especially for this game, especially Jayden Maiava coming off arguably his worst game as a Trojan. But I think it's a really interesting discussion because we talked about Miller Moss versus Jayden Maiava. And the point I brought up was it was kind of like what Urban Meyer did at Florida in 2006 with Chris Leak and Tim Tebow. Leak would get the team down the field. Tebow would get the team into the end zone. And that's kind of what I was wondering. Should Lincoln Riley have done that last year, especially when you had a traditional or just a pocket passer with Miller Moss and then kind of the dual threat ability of Jayden Maiava? Obviously, Riley didn't do that, but I thought there definitely could have been room, especially because USC did struggle in the end zone. I mean, most notably in that Washington game last year where the Huskies held USC on a goal line stand. And ultimately was that final straw that cost Moss his job. But this year, I think it's a little different because Longstreet, both Maiava and Longstreet, are dual threat quarterbacks. They both have that ability. So it's definitely an interesting thing. I do want to see Maiava get his chance to I definitely want to see Maiava, obviously get the reps. I'm not opposed to seeing Longstreet get used, but if you're going to put him in for one play, don't just run it. Like, everybody knows. Like, at this point, it's, if I'm David Braun on Northwestern and they bring in Husan Lonsgstreet, I'm going, okay, you know what? If they beat us with a pass play, I'll accept it. But so have Husan Lonsgstreet pass. Actually let him, just see how he feels in the offense. And obviously, one other thing you brought up, could Longstreet become the starter next year? I'm not saying he can't or shouldn't have a shot at it, but the question does depend. Does Jayden Maiava feel like he's going to get pushed out if, you play Longstreet too much and want to transfer? Does Maiava think he's ready for the NFL? I don't think he is, which leads to the third option is, does he come back to USC for another year? And I think that's honestly, even if Maiava comes back one more year and even starts that whole year, I don't think that's inherently terrible for Longstreet. Allows him to get more comfortable in the system and develop. Obviously, probably 2 years is maybe the max you can wait, but it's definitely something I think the coaches are going to have to figure out. So I think Maiava's got to play most of it. Maybe you mix in Longstreet, but don't be so predictable with him. And hopefully Maiava does just have an overall better game.
Yeah, so boy, a lot of layers of the onion to peel away on this one, Crash. So, you mentioned, the Florida parallel with Tebow and Leak under Urban Meyer 19 years ago. And boy, I'm getting old because that's 19 years ago. But do you think like that's the way for Lincoln Riley to kind of be Solomon and split the baby, as it were, that Longstreet could be this kind of Swiss Army knife? I made the comparison on Sunday's show to Taysom Hill, the way the New Orleans Saints always sprinkle in Taysom Hill for several snaps during the game, often to run, but he has the threat to throw. Do you think that the way to do this is quote unquote normal football versus red zone and special situation football? Like, you also put in Longstreet on 4th and 1 as a specific running threat, or it should just be the general game and that like you're always mixing in Longstreet generally to certain degrees. Should Longstreet be like the closer, the ninth inning guy, like special situation, or it's just about looking at this as a 60-minute canvas and let's make sure Longstreet gets some opportunities over the course of those 60 minutes?
I think it's more of a 60-minute canvas, Matt. But however, I think you should be using Longstreet kind of, I guess, in a little bit of an arbitrary fashion, where even he's kind of like not exactly ready to run in, just like when the team's in the red zone. What if it's like, hell, maybe you start a drop, maybe he just, hell, what if he just trots out the field for literally after on the opening kickoff, the first play of the opening drive of the game, like for that. But then at the end, maybe you throw him at the red zone, throw him in somewhere at the 50. You get the idea that it's like you just maybe sprinkle him for one or two plays to kind of throw off the opposing defense. And then you go, okay, then they don't know. Then that way, I think it's a good way to, give Longstreet reps, allow him, get comfortable playing college football, but then also, assures Maiava that he's the guy, he's the starter. He's not going to lose his job this year, which I think, as we've heavily been discussing over the last couple of days, Matt, that he absolutely should not.
Absolutely. Okay, there's a lot more to talk about, but first, I just want to highlight this comment in the chat. Now, folks, just going to pause here. You see the handle, okay? For those who watched me and Tim Prangley last year, do you know who this is? This is a big deal, all right? I can give you 5 more seconds. Who is the person with the handle Janiv Cox? All right, time's up. This is Gary from Dana Point. Gary, so great to see you back on here in the chat. Missed you a lot. Like that just makes my heart full. So we just want to welcome back Gary from Dana Point, one of the best, most loyal, funny, insightful, witty, just all around terrific USC fans out there. Gary, welcome back. It is a privilege and pleasure to have you here on USC Primetime Live with Crashlet Collier. Just like that's just a highlight of my day right there. Gary from Dana Point weighing in. And Gary's point, interception is going to kill us if we're not careful. And one of the things, Crash, about this quarterback situation, we're seeing Jayden Maiava regress. And the interesting part is, is he just kind of losing his grasp of the fundamentals, because he was so smooth and so careful with the ball first 4 games of the season. And I made the point on Sunday night that it basically comes down to the schedule getting tougher. So with Northwestern being the opponent, definitely expecting a cleaner game from Jayden Maiava. Like if he struggles against Northwestern, and I know Northwestern's defense is not really awful, but really, Northwestern should not have the athletes to hang with USC. Trojans are a 14.5-point favorite. Like if Maiava can't slice and dice Northwestern, certainly a sign of concern. But Crash, as we continue this very important quarterback conversation, you said don't make the patterns predictable. I think that's an excellent piece of insight because you have that Oregon game right around the corner. And I'm not taking Northwestern for granted. I will say, though, it should be a W. I'm not saying it will be, because, again, should and will, there's always a difference between those two things, the possibility and the reality. But, USC certainly should win this game, and it should win the Iowa game. And so with that Oregon game circled in red on November 22nd, it could be for a spot in the college football playoff. You do not want to give Dan Lanning anything predictable. You do not want to have a set pattern that he is able to jump on and snuff out plays with Husan Lonsgstreet. So I really think you're onto something, Crash, with that particular part. So, you want Longstreet to be integrated into the offense, but you don't want to be predictable, and you don't want to limit him to red zone situations. You also said as well, and I agree, he can't just run. He has to throw it a little bit. So let's get into some of the particulars in terms of how we might want to see Husan Longstreet used. Do we want to use him on, let's say, at least one predictable passing situation just so that he kind of gets that kind of situational pressure, not specific to red zone or 4th and 1, but just like you'll need to put him in on at least 1 or 2 throwing downs, throwing situations. And also, like, do you want to put him in on consecutive plays? Not a full drive, but consecutive plays, so that you're able to get him used to that rhythm of, okay, I did this play, and now I need to mentally turn the page and go right to the next play. Or are you just parachuting him in for 1 play on a first quarter drive, and 1 play on a third quarter possession, and 1 play early in the fourth quarter? So lots of degrees, variations, Crash, of those possibilities or other things I didn't even mention. Any evolving sense of like how to use Husan Lonsgstreet as a change up and a change of pace against Northwestern.
So I think, Matt, you'd made an interesting point about maybe you do just have him do some things that are predictable, helps him get comfortable. But then also, what if when I've said earlier, like kind of just sprinkle him in, I wasn't trying to exclude, like have him in for maybe 2 or 3 consecutive plays. Obviously, I'm not saying he should be taking command of an entire drive, unless, of course, it's a blowout, at which point, if Jayden Maiava is still on the field, that's a concern of its own that we can that we'll definitely be discussing on Monday if it's game's clearly over and Maiava's still out there. But I think it could be good to keep him in for 2 or 3 plays. Then he, learns how to, have to, adjust and just, have to, be able to call multiple plays. Obviously, he's got the headset now. You don't have to, have everything memorized or, have to have it sent in. So, he can be in touch with Lincoln Riley and Luke Heward and on the headset the whole time. So I think that helps. But then I think it's just helps him get more comfortable and just learn how it's like, all right, we're doing this play, then we're doing this one, then we're doing that one. Here's what we do if this happens. Here's what we do if that happens. It helps them just, I think, learn how to just take command of the offense and really just get everyone set up in the right position. So don't think it's a terrible idea if you even do have him out for 2 to 3 plays at a time during a drive. But obviously, that's something else you should be varying. So that way, whoever the opponent can't just, think, all right, we got Longstreet and he's staying in for 3. Like, make them stay on their feet with who's going to be on it. So I think there are just so many ways this discussion can go. So it's really fast. Yeah. So it's just such a fascinating topic. Like when you brought up the point of multiple plays. So I think that's why you got to make that another aspect of unpredictability too.
Yeah. In terms of, let's just talk about Longstreet as a passer. And, let me just say, I don't think Lincoln Riley is going to use Husan Lonsgstreet very much. I'm pushing the idea that he needs to use him more because, we needed to see Jayden Maiava play late last season. Now, as you've explained a lot, Crash, over the past 48 hours, Miller Moss was a kind of a stationary drop back quarterback, and Maiava was offering something different. It's not the same thing with Maiava and Longstreet. They can both run. They're both mobile. They're both dual threat. But what's similar is like you do want to get Husan Longstreet, enough live reps, enough of a taste of in-game pressure that when you go into the off season, when you go into summer camp next year, like he will have a bed of experience and of teachable moments that's going to really aid in his development. And I know that USC is still playing for the playoff, but like Northwestern is so notable, and I think it's the right time to push this idea of giving Husan Longstreet more reps, just because this is the most manageable game left on the schedule. Like if there is one game where you can kind of take some liberties a little bit, like not be reckless, but at least give this younger guy more of a chance, it's this one. Because Iowa, Kirk Ferentz, that's a really tough defense. That could be a really tricky assignment for a young quarterback, could jeopardize potentially losing that game. And then, of course, UCLA is kind of its own animal. Like it's the battle for the victory bell, battle for bragging rights. You want your QB1, Maiava, to kind of own that game, take charge of it. And then, of course, there's Oregon. Northwestern's like the best chance USC is going to have of, all right, if we sacrifice a few plays or maybe even one possession to give Husan Longstreet experience, we can sacrifice that one possession. Not that it's your intent, but like if the possession or the Husan Lonsgstreet packages don't go well, you could probably still overcome that. The only way you wouldn't is if he throws a pick six, commits an absolutely disastrous mistake. But because you're coaching him up for a small subset of plays, you're thinking that, all right, the worst thing that happens is he throws an incompletion or maybe an intentional grounding penalty. That's not going to lose you a game, all right? So like this Northwestern game gives you the space. It gives USC and Lincoln Riley the space to experiment a little, not a ton, but some on the margins. And so Crash, as we kind of dive more into Husan Lonsgstreet as a thrower, what kinds of pass plays do you think would make the most sense for Husan Lonsgstreet? Because the first thing that comes to mind is a screen, but like he could telegraph the screen so transparently that the defense is able to read it, and that could be a pick six the other way, because if he's just lobbing a screen pass into the backfield and it gets read easily, it could be a disaster. So maybe the screen pass isn't the kind of pass that Husan Lonsgstreet should throw. Maybe it's like a quick slant in, or maybe it's like a short out, sprint rollout pass into the flat. Any thoughts on like what the passing game package should look like for Husan Lonsgstreet, knowing that defenses are probably going to be thinking run first if he is inserted into the game?
So Matt, before I answer, I do want to obviously talk about the obvious one difference is with this kind of situation we're discussing, whereas last year USC season was pretty much done, whereas this year they're very much in contention. I mean, they just came in at number 19 in the CFP rankings that were released about a couple hours ago. So I think there's obviously, you got to factor that into it too. And then Northwestern, I think, is the right game too, like you said, because they're a good team. And I'm going to just say this, it might be a bit of a hot take. I think Northwestern, just despite how badly they handled the whole Pat Fitzgerald thing, it seems like they found some new momentum under David Braun in these last 2.5 years. So I think that also makes it interesting, but also they seem like they're a good opponent because they're good, but they're not like Oregon or Iowa good. And then UCLA, of course, as well. UCLA, and that can just go anyway, especially with how the Bruins are just all over the place with how they've been playing. So, but back to Longstreet, I think there is obviously the argument you do maybe the shorter slants, but part of me just wants, just see him get on the field and just let it rip. So even just throwing deep balls, especially when you have two good receivers in Mekhi Lemon and Jacoby Lane, who are going to really, I am confident, do a good job helping him out in, even if isn't exactly a perfect situation. And because Northwestern isn't as good as, an Iowa defense or an Oregon defense, it's a good opportunity to where Lemon and Lane can probably help him and bail him out of if, he does maybe, doesn't nail it quite perfectly or screws it up a little bit. So I think for those reasons, I'm kind of more just wanting to see him just let it rip and just let him just try to just give him some confidence and just stay confident with him in that. I'm not saying obviously mix it up, but I kind of just want to see him just throw a lot of deep balls, really.